recording, but I want to unrecord it.
You just stop and then start over again.
Up to 11. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to
Yeah.
get the last of the doorbells going. Right. One more minute on this, and then we're going to start. It's like a old-fashioned doorbell. All right. I'm going to say, oh, can you get that one, Brucey? Oh, God. Up to 17. It's a nice number. I'm going to say welcome everyone to the Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathway June meeting. Tonight we have a special guest. If you read through the bio, I'm going to be sticking to that. Our guest is Dave Small, and he's a naturalist, jack of all trades with many, many skills in the natural world. We were just talking about how he converted his backyard to a rewild area, including a large pond. So what do we say? 190 species on 1.1 acres have been discovered so far. But anyway,
That's 890.
oh, 390. Oh,
No,
890.
oh, okay.
890.
Oh
Yeah.
boy, I was off by a mile there. Um, so it's great. We are recording this. I think what's happening now. Yep, this is anyway. Dave Small is a conservation scientist, naturalist, and educator. And he spent many years with the DCR Quabbin Reservoir as their director, and now is active in the several roles, Director of Conservation at Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. He serves on the Mass Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Advisory Committee, and he's been and is active as president of the Athol Bird and Nature Club and director of Millers River Environmental Center. He runs workshops, lectures, field trips across New England. And tonight he's going to enlighten us with his knowledge about moths, one of the lesser known pollinators. But if you can stay up at night and get yourselves outside, you'll be able to find some of these. So without further ado, I will give you the mic. Welcome, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And it's a topic I enjoy speaking about. It's one of the more recent hobbies I've picked up. But when I really got into moths pretty deeply, I actually went out and took a class at the Southwest Research Station in Portal, Arizona, and spent a week out there with the American Museum of Natural History, and spent a full immersive week of moth watching, identifying, collecting, and all those things. It was quite a remarkable week for sure, because when we weren't looking at moths, we were watching for rattlesnakes and other such things. And it was extremely interesting and wonderful week. And I would recommend going to um, places like that, like the Southwest Research Station or places like Eagle Hill in Maine for really immersive courses like that. So that's where I kind of got my start in moths. Well, it's when I got my start of actually knowing what they were. I've been watching them for a while. So the natural history journey for many of us started often with birds. And that was my case. I had an 8th grade science teacher that was really probably instrumental in my whole life because he got us looking at birds and rocks and minerals and a few other things. And we he started this after school nature club, and that was in 1963. And in 1964, I entered the 8th grade, and that's when I started looking at birds. So I've been doing this for a couple of years. So as we do go along, our natural history interests can diversify, as mine certainly have. And I spend a lot of time looking at butterflies and reptiles and amphibians, dragonflies. I went to the Eagle Hill uh, uh, in Maine to do a dragonfly class, which was, again, a wonderful immersive experience. I did that in 1999. The picture in the middle is members of my friends from the Mass Butterfly Club. And I've had the privilege of touring around the country with these guys, and really a lot of fun. You know, we did a great trip to the Tetons and looked at butterflies over 10,000 feet. And we've been to Colorado and Washington and all kinds of places. So I have a pretty diverse interest in natural history. So when we start looking at moths, a lot of the public that you talk to really have kind of a negative opinion of moths. You know, you first think of the meal moth, the Indian meal moth that's in your cupboard, really making your grains inedible. And we have such great things as the gypsy moth that we can really trace right back to Medford and that area where they were brought into this country with the hopes of making silk, and it didn't go well. Um, they're really very much around these days. They're not in the numbers that we had back in like 1980. Everything was defoliated in this region, um, and there's been some natural enemies that have been brought in to help control the numbers of gypsy moths. Now they're called, excuse me, uh, um, spongy moth. They changed the name, protect the innocent. I'll have to change this slide. But anyway, so we do have a kind of a little uphill battle to get people to think that moths are the good guys.
Mhm.
But when you have things like a Luna moth, and I had one this morning at my house, these things are just absolutely spectacular. And I try to remind people when you're looking at a new group like moths, really start with some of the bigger, more prominent species and kind of work your way down. You know what I mean? And you get down to a whole lot of little brown jobs and other stuff that really it takes a little time to try to discern what they are. And a lot of times I think it's just wonderful to just really be in awe at the diversity and the color and the forms that they have. And it's just a, you know, before you get too mired in the names, think about the real neat individuals that you're looking at. So we often start with the giant silk moths, and the last few days I've had several reports of Polyphemus and Promethea. Polyphemus on the top, Promethea on the bottom, um, coming to lights and being very visible. These things can be 5 inches across in a wingspan. They're big, and bold and kind of cool. These silk moths don't feed as adults. All of their calorie intake is done when they're in the larval stage, and then when they actually come out, the females set off a bunch of pheromones that attracts the males, and then really they're done. Once the female has mated and laid her eggs, her mission on the planet is all over. So all of their real active life is in the larval stage.
Mm.
So there are a lot of smaller silk moths, and one of the crowd favorites is on the left, the rosy maple moth, and this is a fairly early spring flyer. It comes out in the middle of April, right when the maple leaves are unfolding. Um, and I get these in quite abundance. I've had 50 of these on the wall at one time. The one on the right is.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Are you
Sure.
are you showing slides?
Oh, you
Yes,
can't see them?
I can.
You see them?
I see them. Are other people not seeing them?
I'm seeing them.
I don't know, Kim.
I'm seeing them as well. I think most people are seeing them.
So maybe Kim, do you want to go out and come back in?
Yeah,
See.
sorry to interrupt. I'll see what's wrong on my end.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, by all means. Technology is such a good thing, huh?
Yeah. So the pink striped oakworm is obviously the one on the left, right?
It's
Correct?
the one. Well, it's on my right. It's the right of the thing. It's the one that's got the two white dots on a dark
Oh,
surface.
okay.
Yeah, and it's a little bit larger than the rosy maple moth, but very similar in actual style. When you look at them, but they're definitely in the same family of these silk moths.
Mm.
All right, you working good. All right, on we go. Okay, so moths are part of the Lepidoptera group. The Lepidoptera means scaled wings, and under an electron microscope, you can see what the scales actually look like. Pretty interesting stuff. This is what gives them all their colors and shapes, and really these modified scales really give them all the diversity. So we talk about butterflies and moths being Lepidoptera, and the difference between butterflies and moths is really a human construct. We like to put names and labels and organize things, and somewhere back in time, they actually decided to split butterflies and moths. All the myths about, moths fly at night and butterflies fly during the day. There's tons of exceptions going both ways. One of our trips to Texas, we were at Santa Ana, and one of our friends came running out saying, "Fitzgartner's flag in the bathroom," and it was actually this butterfly that actually sleeps in caves during the day in Mexico and is just a rare crossover. But because of the hot weather, they really get out where it's very cool at night. So they fly at night and roost during the day. But for the most part, butterflies and moths are differentiated because of their antenna. And as you look here, the moths have two different types of antennas. Either it's a feathery antenna or a very needle-like antenna, where all the butterflies have clubbed antennas. So even this little skipper actually has a clubbed antenna, which, although it resembles a moth in lots of ways, that's how they differentiate it. And on the when you look at the chart of butterflies and moths of North America, the butterflies are actually in the middle of the whole gambit. So there's moths that are older in time and moths that are newer in time than butterflies. So as people that love gardening, there are very good plants to attract moths and butterflies. Certainly, my button bush on the left and what's that, a cardinal flower on the right there. These are things that are just good native plants, and I'd strongly recommend that we promote native plants everywhere we can. And and we try to stay away from some of the cultivars because when humans uh, move around with a gene pool on flowers and stuff, they usually are trying to get bigger flowers, and sometimes they actually reduce the amount of nectar that's available for your insects, and you know, they're very showy, but they have very little um, environmental goodness left in them. So we like to get as old a variety as we can, and try to really maintain some of this native plant diversity. So one of the other big things about moths is that they're actually the um, the engine that motivates a lot of other wildlife in our area. This black-throated green warbler, a few weeks ago, just as the buds were breaking, was moving north, and one of the big food sources for all these migrating birds from the tropics are actually caterpillars. And here's a couple of caterpillars that I got from my good friend Sam Jaffe at the Caterpillar Lab. And basically, if you look at these things, they look like pieces of stick or whatever, and very, very cryptic in their description. But these caterpillars emerge with the budding flowers of oak trees and maple trees in the early spring. So that timing of the emerging of the budding of the leaves on the oak leaves, and the emergence of these moths is what carries all those migratory birds northward. When you go out to Mount Auburn or whatever, and in the early parts of May, everyone has their binoculars and looking up at the treetops, and that's because all the birds are up there eating these caterpillars, and that's what really drives the bus and on all that activity. And really, um, a whole lot of stuff happens in this larval stage, and they're pretty cool looking in their larval stage too. So I mean, these are some right from my yard. Um, you know, I have big patches of goldenrod that are very good in the late summer for a lot of things to be chewing on. Um, I know one of the big complaints I've had people call me and say, "Geez, I planted this pollinator garden and it's totally been eaten up." Well, I said, success. You know, you part of our whole idea with pollinator gardens is provide host plants for the larval stages of all these different bugs and butterflies that are going to be pollinators as they grow up and transform. So my suggestion is just plant more stuff if they're eating it all up. So attracting moths. So I'll just go over a little bit of this. This is the first thing you can do if you're trying to attract a moth is use different wavelengths of light. And the easiest thing to do is just a black light bulb. They now have them in LED form. There's actually a lot of research has been going on light frequencies and how to develop it. And there's a company in England now that has some really cool LED lamps that are available that have the broadest spectrum of light that attracts different moths. And although they're pretty pricey at the moment, I may get one someday. But it's really interesting. And then I also use a high intensity mercury vapor bulb that show in later pictures. But that's kind of a really for more specialized use. I do mothing surveys and stuff, and it's one of the they're pretty bright and can draw moths in from quite a distance. One of the other things that I do quite often is baiting for moths, and we call it sugaring. And the most common combination is some beer, some brown sugar, rotten fruit, usually bananas is like the mainstay, and then you ferment it in the sun for a couple of days till it gets a little bit odoriferous, and then you paint it on trees. So that's really I'll show you how we do that as I get further along. And then of course you're out at night, you should have a headlamp or flashlight. Some people do recommend a red lens so that you don't scare the moths, especially if you're baiting. And you'll see they do notice you coming with a flashlight. So sometimes they might spook. And then a point and shoot camera. And then weather-wise, hot, humid, moonless summer nights are the best. But moths are here year-round. So even in the middle of winter, on a warm day, if it gets above 40 degrees, with a little bit of bait, sugaring, I can go out in the afternoon, do a little bait, paint a little bait on the trees, and have a bunch of different overwintering adult moths showing up right after sunset, before it gets down to really cold again. So we can look for moths as we do butterflies. The morning cloaks and some others are actually overwintering as adults, and they'll come out on those 50-degree winter days and be seen. So as I said, one of the first things if you're trying to attract some moths, this is just changing from a regular light bulb to a CFL black light bulb. You can buy these at a department store for $5. So it's a good place to start. I try not to put them next to the door you plan to go in and out all night. My wife really appreciates moths, but she'd really rather they stay outside. So sometimes you put them on like not your front door that you use, but like a side door or something which you could not, because you open the door, a lot of them will follow you in. This is another setup I have out of my breezeway. It's just a couple of 2-foot black lights with a white sheet between them. The white sheet actually helps to reflect out the light, and it helps to attract moths in. And it's not really necessary, but it does help to amplify the light images that you're transmitting. This is my mercury vapor light. This is on my back shed that faces out over the yard and the pollinator gardens and everything else I got going. But this is a relatively typical summer night. You can see such things as there's a Luna moth here, and there's some insects from my pond, fish flies and such. On one of these pictures, I had a spring peeper climbing on the wall. Again, he's looking for the free lunch program, but they really are. So whenever I do it, this is all not a permanently set up system. So when I want to do mothing, I just flip one switch and my lights go on. And then I don't like to leave my lights on when I'm not actually going to be observing. So I always shut them off if I'm up real late. I don't want them on when the sun comes up, because the birds have really learned that this is a really good food source for them if you would bring all these moths together. So I try to keep the nighttime mothing, in the dark, and don't keep going after sunrise. So I have a lot of portable setups that I do on when I go out on surveys. This is at the land trust where I work now. We just had a moth party and invited people and set up this in the field. We also had lights over by the main office building, but these events at night, as you know, are really kind of fun and really get people to see stuff that they haven't been aware of. And being out at night in the woods is not something that a lot of people are comfortable with normally. So I mentioned about baiting. So there's a couple of methodologies going on. The bait itself, again, this person used peaches and some banana and a little bit of beer. I know when I was a teenager, my father used to have some port wine. I used to take some of that without his knowing it. But anyway, any kind of alcohol with some sort of fermenting going on. And the big trick about baiting, and you see this young woman, you make a nice clean patch and try not to, the bait should be thick enough so it doesn't run. If it runs down to the ground, it'll be picked up by ants, and then you wind up with a whole big ant pile on the side of the tree. And this doesn't hurt the tree. Some baits will stain it somewhat, so it looks like a dark patch on the trunk. So if you do it in your yard, do it on the side of the tree or the back so it's not visible. Yeah, but this is a very good method of attracting moths pretty much year round. On the top here, you see a piece of rope, and what they use the rope for is they'll actually make up some bait, soak the cotton rope in the bait, and then hang the cotton rope over a branch, like a 3-foot piece of rope, and the moths will come and find that. Again, this is really good to do in the early spring and late fall, particularly when these moths are actually overwinter as adults, and their normal food source would be broken limbs and oozing sap. Particularly in the middle of winter, if you get an ice storm or something, you get a broken branch and they bleed, and that sugar sap it flows, and that's what a lot of these moths rely on in the middle of winter for their energy source. Here's an example of some baiting. Again, a nice neat patch of bait, and you have all these sallows that come in, and again, these are usually late fall into the winter and early spring. I get a lot of these, but the bait really kind of works good. There's a green arches on the bait, yeah, but again, a lot of these ones that are coming to the bait would not necessarily come to light. So you get a whole different group of moths by using bait, just because of their different evolutions. So again, there's lots of different ways to deal with fruit. Down in Florida, I've seen this more in the South, in Texas and Florida and Arizona, where they just put the fruit in a onion bag and hang it up, and it does actually work quite well. So you just don't have it where you're going to be walking necessarily, but anyway, it's another way, an easy way to develop fruit, a bait station. So there's a whole group of moths that actually don't usually come to light, although the one on the left here, the upper left, this is the maple callus borer moth, and this is probably one of the few of this group that actually does come to light pretty readily. But this one here that looks like a hornet, and this is the hornet clearwing, and this is a moth. It's got no stinger. It's got no ability to do any damage to you. Completely docile, and you can see it's on my finger. It's pretty cool. Lots of things mimic bees for protection. So here's a moth that really went to it. And then down here is another one that actually it does feed on lilac and a few other things like that. But these moths are more easily attracted with what we call a lure. And this is the pheromones that the female moths emit that the males pick up on. And we have these this green holder of the bait, and it acts like a lobster trap, same kind of thing. And actually the moths get in there and they don't know how to get back out. There's a funnel inside. But these baits, that little bait thing costs about $3 and probably $5 now, but it'll last a month or so out of the yard. And usually I do this right around this time of year right now into the middle of July is kind of the prime time for the clearwings. And they're a whole different neat group of moths. So without the bait, without the luring of the pheromone lures, you would rarely come across them. So when we talk about plants, it really should be known that a lot of the plants that moths and butterflies like are actually woody plants and are in the yard. So Virginia creeper. There's a Virginia creeper sphinx moth, very specialized to that. But the grape has many different species that feed on it. So that's another good plant to have in the yard. Um, Sugar maples certainly have a lot of insects that use them. All those maple moths and whatnot, maple borers, and white oak. And all the oak species probably have more invertebrate use than any other plant. So if you're able to have an oak tree in your yard or the back somewhere nearby, you can get a whole lot of things being attracted by that. So when you're looking at pollinators and things, don't overlook the tree species. So as I mentioned before, the rosy maple moth, again, it feeds on most maple species. They're very abundant, quite pretty, and probably the one I get calls about the most, and when they start coming out in May, it's just a real refreshing start of the year for us invertebrate fans. It's a similar looking species that's actually quite different. This is the primrose moth, and it's pretty cool. I have primrose, and you do find them on the flowers, and again, this is just good stuff. I never used to have, when I first started, there weren't any field guides. And as time has progressed, we've actually gotten now a couple of great field guides. And the Peterson Field Guide to Moths is a really good primer, get you started. A lot of things. The issue with field guides with moths that we don't know how many moths there actually are. There could be as many as 10 or 12,000 species in Massachusetts. So any field guide isn't going to get you there, but it should get you down to the family. And by using other internet options, you can work it down. And I'll talk about those later. But the David Wagner, who's a professor down at UConn, has put together the Caterpillar of Eastern North America. Again, a great resource. It doesn't do everything, but quite often it's going to get you close. And then you can use the internet to help to refine your search for your moth. So I use a small point and shoot camera. This is just a little handheld thing that really it has a 3x micro lens on it, so you can get a really close up. It will focus within an inch of the lens. So that's the kind of thing you want to look for. Its ability to close focus, and it should have a flash, and also I use a flashlight in concert with it. So to take away the black light or the mercury vapor light's shadow of coloration, use a white flashlight to give you the true color. And of course, you put it on a computer. You can also use your phones. The cameras and phones today are amazing, and I have several friends that pretty much use their phone for everything. So good to do. I mentioned before that I put everything on iNaturalist. I find iNaturalist to be a really good resource. My method is I go out in the evening and I'll take a number of pictures of all the moths on my wall. And then I come in and I actually crop and clean up all my pictures, so that if you notice, all of my pictures are basically the moths are facing straight up, and they're fairly close cropped, which makes identification by other people much easier. So if you've got a nice clean picture and it's oriented correctly. Back in when I first started mothing, the Moth Photographers Group, if you were going to submit a picture to them, you had to have it in this format. So closely cropped, facing straight up, or if it's one of the moths that would be more horizontal, a horizontal picture, like this beautiful wood nymph, you could have it horizontally. But overall, it's best if you can make a nice clean shot, which gives you the opportunity to have someone look at your specimen and help you get to identification. Yeah, so in this, at the date I did this one, I had 912 species in the yard at the time out of 967. And then out of that group that's not counted as that out of the 912 are many that are only in the genus group. And right now I've got probably over 14,000 pictures of moths from mostly my yard, but on other excursions. So I've been tracking these now for a while. So, but I really think that iNaturalist is a good tool to use. And just like people that are using Merlin and other things with birds, this is a guide. It's not the definitive answer. And the good thing about this is that there's a crowdsourcing identification. So you'll have people come in and confirm your sighting or give you a different identification, and you're able to go back and research it and correct yourself and learn from that. So it's a very accommodating group of people, and it's really I just enjoy interacting with the different folks. So if you've made a misidentification, don't feel bad. It's just part of the learning curve, and we all learn. So Massachusetts is really probably one of the few states in the country that has a comprehensive website of Massachusetts moths. Stephen Whitebread, this is one of his his doing. He has several people that are contributors, regular contributors, but he'll take sightings off of iNaturalist, and which all have spatial and timestamps on them, and is actually tracking where moths are around the state. And he has the most up-to-date list of moths and where they are. So it's very good resource to learn a little bit more. And then we all always refer back to Bug Guide and Moth Photographers Group as kind of where we go for more research on what the species we think we're looking at. So, like I said, books can't do it all for us, but certainly having these online resources, which have all the moths that we're possibly going to see, you could go ahead and dope it out and really begin to learn some of the basics. And again, getting out there and having some fun, it's really, I've never had a kid not enjoy it. I mean, it's just they're looking at weird stuff, and the weirder the better, So I think the spectacular thing about discovering moths is really the beauty and diversity. The wavy lined emerald is only one of about a half a dozen or so green, beautiful, small green moths that frequent my wall. Just pretty neat stuff. There's a white fringed emerald that looks very similar without the lines are straighter. But anyway, there's a lot of neat stuff. And on most of my pictures, I do have a number down here, and that number 7058 in this case is part of what the a scientist named Hodge made a list of all Lepidoptera in North America and gave them all a number. And that's the number I use to sort all my slides. So all my slides are named first with that number, and then the species, and then the date and the place. So they all become a record, and they're sorted by that number. So out of those 12,000 moths, if I want to see all of my wavy line emeralds, I could just type in that number in my search engine on my photographs, and they would all come up. And it allows me to go back and see the flight dates and all that sort of stuff that I've had in the past. And it works really, really well for me trying to understand flight periods and whatnot. So So that Hodges number is and Bug Guide and Moth Photographers Group both use that number. There's a newer number now that they're using, and I've decided not to adopt it as they've now split and lumped a bunch of species, and they're just making like the 7058 could be 7058.1, for a new species that's close by. So, if they split this to two species, they'll just add a point. But anyway, this is how I'm able to sort my photographs, and I'm very thankful for Mr. Hodge for putting that list together. So some of the things that are out there, I mean, the diversity is pretty cool. This is a scallop shell up here on the top. I had one this morning. Really kind of interesting. This is one you can only get down to the genus level. There's like 3 species that are very, very similar, and you really you got to really dissect them to get to the actual species. So I'm very pleased to get down to the genus level with these, and that's fine. But the others, again, it's just and these are the little inchworm type caterpillars that all these moths come from. This group.
Mm.
So back when I was a kid, I learned about industrial melanism over in England, that they thought that these moths were actually acclimating to the soot from the industrial age on the trees. Some of that has been debunked by a Massachusetts scientist, Ted Sargent, who actually did a lot of research out in Leverett, which has no industrial soot anywhere. And these are from my own house. This is the melanistic form of that oak beauty, which is the one that they studied in England. So it may or may not be due to industrial melanism, but melanism in moths is actually fairly common. And I found several species now that have this dark form. And same with birds. Birds can be melanistic also. So it gives it a little more added complexity to try to figure out whether this is the same species as that. So, but it is. But interesting stuff.
Mm.
So this whole group of these the climbings, these things are just beautiful and relatively abundant during the summer, quite distinctive, and it's just even though they're different species, they're very similar. And again, it takes a little practice. And the problem with these guys is that some of these species really are a little bit have variations in the pattern of the black. So it's a little bit difficult to discern to species exactly which one you're looking at, except for the climbing. That's a real easy one for the yellow underwing, and that's a good one. But the others can be a little bit difficult. Then I have some moths that show up, and this one, you think of the virgin tiger moth as very, very similar to this, and it looked a little big to me. And sometimes you just got to kind of, play with it a little bit to see what happens. And when I gave this a little poke with my finger, it kind of turned into this. And this is just a really cool moth. It's a it feeds on wild indigo, and it's just really cool. And this is a salt marsh. I can't see my thing because this is in the way, but the salt marsh moth. And anyway, it was here in Athol, Massachusetts. We don't have any salt marshes, but we do have Baptisia. So so that's its host plant. And again, you plant it, they'll come. I also had this out at Martha's Vineyard and a couple other places now, but this was at this time when I got this particular moth, it was a life moth for me, and new for the yard.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of these pyrustas, and and uh, this is the raspberry pyrusta, and again they're very small, probably about a little bigger than a dime, and there's 3 or 4 species. There's a mint and a couple others that are just beautifully and delicate and fun to find.
Mm. Beautiful.
So then we get into some of the micro moths, and again these are on the chart. These are up at the near the top. This is the Atlantis webworm moth. This is relatively common and actually is a day flyer. We see it quite often out in the field. Now, some of these other guys, this is the Suzuki's Promolactus. I don't speak Latin very well, and neither does anybody else that I know. But anyway, these guys are just spectacular. And this is the nut sedge moth. Again, these things are really small. And the big thing with the cameras these days that you can really get close-up shots of very small things. The sheets that I'm using are actually the cloth. It's ripstop cloth that has squares in the fabric that are like 0.6 millimeters and or centimeters, and that gives you something to measure these guys by. And so so these guys, will fit it within a square of that cloth. But again, we can take photographs of stuff that little now, which really wasn't possible just a few years ago. This is the beautiful wood nymph. And again, it doesn't look real to me. I mean, it's certainly, it has modified scales. It's really fuzzy. It looks more like a bird dropping, which is probably its habit of remaining undetected, or at least undesirable if it is detected. So it doesn't look like food for most predators, but really cool moth. So the other thing is we go and actually do some field stuff. This is my backyard. We have the light set up on the garden fence. I talked with Gene earlier, that my yard, which is just over an acre, everything in the yard is food for, butterflies, birds, moths, amphibians and reptiles, and people. So we have a vegetable garden, we have blueberries, we have all kinds of other things, apple trees and everything. So it's just, I pack a lot into an acre, Here we are in the yard. This is Tom Murray, who's another Mass, one of our great amateur entomologists, who's written several books now. And there's the patio in the back. This is this is really my main pollinator garden here, and that goes for about 5 feet, and then there's a stone wall, and then the lower lawn. But this is how we do a mothball. That's we have great food. If people want to spend the night, they can spend the night, and they can camp out, whatever. But it's just a really enjoyable time, and we stay up late. So being private property, I don't have any restrictions, and I've coerced my neighbors into being tolerant. But it's just a lot of fun. And last year we had about 70 people come, and at 4 a.m, there was still a half a dozen people poking around when I had to call it quits.
It's cool.
So again, just with different setups. I lament the loss of BioQuip. We used to buy all our equipment out of BioQuip, where I got this sheet and the black light. This can run on 12 volts, so you can do it out of a car battery real easily. Again, this is, my little point and shoot camera. And I have a setup in the woods, just behind my house on actually my neighbor's property, and hang the sheet on the tent and put up the lights, and that works really well. I did have a few years ago, we were trying to set this up in the woods, and I had a mother bear and 3 cubs that were hanging around the backyard. And so I wasn't able to put it out in the woods. I went to put this up, and I looked over about 50 feet away was a mother bear looking back at me, and the cubs were on the tree right next to it. So that year we stayed closer to home. Yeah, here we are at one of our moth nights at the end. Again, it's getting together with a bunch of great people and discovering things. So this is actually at the Mount Grace headquarters quite a few years ago. And you never know what you're going to find. This is, probably the only buddleia bush that I have. We're not recommending buddleia as a mainstay anymore because it does get away. And up here in the northern part of Massachusetts in the hill towns, it doesn't survive well in the winter. So I've had several of these over the years, and this is the only one that survived, the only plant. But you see here with the crab spider hooking onto a moth. So once you kind of get your fill of moths, you're only beginning the journey as all the spiders and I get damselflies and caddisflies and things, all kinds of things showing up in spiders. So there's no end to the explorations that you can do right in your own backyard.
So cool.
So my mothball will be July 19th, the opening night of the National Moth Week. We actually started the mothball back in 2007, and we've been doing it ever since. So we get a few years behind us now, but it really is a fun time. And if you want to learn about our events, AtholeBirdClub.org is a website. You can get on there. We have a mailing list, and we do all manner of natural history excursions. And again, National Moth Week starts on the 19th to the 28th, 2025. I've been on their advisory committee for a while, and really, it's just a very cool thing to be focusing on in the middle of summer.
Terrific.
Yeah, and I'll leave you with I think this is the Himmelman's plume moth, and this one is actually on a the bud, the little blossom of dogbane. So you can just imagine how little that moth is, but striking. It was actually on a butterfly trip on a cloudy day, and it's the only lepidoptera I found that whole day. But anyway, so that's that, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. We're going to open this up to questions, and before we do, I just want to connect mothball to moths to mothball. And with a question, I invited Dave here tonight. I'm part of a group that's bringing a mothball to Cambridge during Moth Week. That's going to be July 23rd, Wednesday night, and it will be held in Kingsley Park, a fresh pond, from 7 till 10. But this notion of having people pay attention to moths during this week, Dave, has it been evolved such that it is now a not legitimate, but a way that people are counting moths, similar to the way Audubon has led the bird count, so that we can keep track of species over periods of time?
I think it's starting to do that. I think the biggest tools for that now are things like iNaturalist, which all of our many scientists across the board are using iNaturalist, and once they're vetted so that they're in research grade of iNaturalist, that you're pretty sure about the identification, that really gives us a lot of information. So all of my moths that I see are all submitted to iNaturalist, and with the date and location, and my estimate of what it actually is, and that I think is really because we're doing that. I have a friend that does bot flies. He's a bot fly expert, and people that post on iNaturalist, he actually gets to see all the botfly postings and actually gets to observe what they are. And we actually were looking, I went to New Mexico with him a few years ago, and we were looking for a particular new botfly that may be a jackrabbit specialist that, we didn't see that on that trip, but he's been back since then and got one. So it's cool stuff, you know what I mean? So, but by just what's happening with citizen science right now is really amazing, and platforms like iNaturalist are coming up to be the real depository for a lot of good observations.
That's great. I think, Andrea, you have a question?
Oh, unmute.
Hi, yeah, I'm Andrea Grossman. I'm actually applying to Mount Grace
Okay.
as a conservation project associate. So hi, I would love to work with you. Bob Purcell told me that you guys are a great organization. And he said he knows all of you, and so he just recommended me to you guys. Anyways, I had wondered, well, if you had heard or talked to Dr. Doug Tallamy. I know he's pretty famous for his whole his books about like feeding caterpillars with birds. But just wondering if you had worked or talked with him.
Yeah, we actually had him present to the. We had a combined meeting with the Brookline Bird Club and the Athol Bird Club, and had Doug do the talk, and that's actually on the atholbirdclub.org website, so you can
Nice.
actually listen to that talk. But it was extremely good. But he's telling us what we should know. Is that really using native plants and using, being smart about what we plant is really the salvation. We're trying to get rid of just plain lawns, and I have a front lawn that's nice and manicured, and the grandkids play kickball on it or whatever, and that's fine. But I have a lot of my acre is not. So we're really trying to diversify and do some things differently than we always did, and that's always a challenge. One of the things that he was talking about was Portland, Oregon is one of the most treed cities in the country, and yet all the trees in Portland, just about that they planted, were all non-native.
Right.
So they actually give very little to the diversity of the city, because they don't have natural predators or enemies or whatever. So I'm just saying, we can learn a lot from what Doug Ptolemy is saying, and I think, we have discussions about some trees. Should we be thinking about, the way the climate is moving, and maybe planting some trees up here that may be, where species in Connecticut or whatever may be already, coming. Yeah, maybe, as a gardener, we all love to experiment, so, and as I said before, my yard is a work in progress. Things kind of get overtopped or not work out well, and you mix and match and bring out some new things. So it's a journey, it's not a destination, so
Can I ask what's your opinion on two things? So I currently in my job have doing plant sales, and so we've been trying to source from like Massachusetts or close by. I know there's like Prairie Moon Nursery is huge, but it's all the way in Minnesota. So what's your two thoughts, two questions about sourcing for ecotypes, and how, like, is that a big deal with like supporting, our native moths and other insects, pollinators? And I had another question. So I know there are a number of nurseries that are doing native plants, but I've seen a few that also have nativars with them. And I'm wondering if, let's say, you want to get the native straight species from these companies, and they're also selling nativars, what are the chances that these straight species that you like are thinking that you're going to get is a straight species has actually partially hybridized or bred with the native R that they have at their nursery.
Right. Good questions, because it's a very messy thing, basically. And I say for the backyard gardener, if you get really close, that's fine. As close as you can. Like I say, try to get to the oldest cultivars or whatever that you can find. Get away from the double blossoms and all that sort of stuff. Try to find as close as you can to what would be the native thing. If you're working on a particular project, like you're trying to do, like things like Carner blue butterflies that are feed on lupin, the domestic lupins that you get hybridize readily with the native lupins. It become a death trap for the caterpillars. So lupins are one plant that probably we shouldn't be planting, because you can't get the right cultivar to begin with, and if you do, you may get this Midwestern lupin that is not compatible with that particular species. So I'm trying to get away from the lupins, I guess now. A lot of other things, are fine, like Liatris. We can get Liatris pretty easily. You can get a few other things, but again, I'm trying to do the best you can in your own yard. But if you're doing a conservation project, like in a wildlife situation, and you're trying to promote, Henry's elfin or frosted elfin or something, you really want to be pretty close to that, exact cultivar you need for that particular area. And so there's a nursery in Hadley that does some of that. But there's several good native plant nurseries. The big issue with a lot of them is that they don't have enough stock to be able to do everything we'd like to be able to do. And so by promoting to your own nursery people, wherever you might shop for your plants, to include more and more natives and buy them from them, we can try to get that to be more widespread, that people are more conscious of that. And I'm trying at home too. I mean, we're not perfect around here, so we're trying to encourage our nursery people to really embrace the native movement.
Yeah. There's not a lot of retails with the straight species I've seen, but like when we've got from wholesale, we got like from part of New England Wetland Plants and
that's a good one.
Nursery. Dragonfly Nurseries is new, and she does straight species. Yeah. Well, we did get lupine from her, which she said it's the native one, but now I'm wondering, what if they could eventually hybridize?
Well, again, it depends if the non-native ones are nearby, that's where the problem would arise. So eventually they may hybridize, so you may be having the good ones now, but you need to kind of be watching over time, and I'm not sure how to tell the difference, to be honest with you. So, because I'm not a botanist.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
All right.
Do we have some other questions? Be surprised. Andrew, I'm going to say that several of us from Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathway, we have lists of local nurseries in the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So I don't know where you're based. What part of the state?
I'm in Maynard myself. I work for Middlesex Conservation District right now. That's in Westford, but we're county-wide quasi-state government organization. And I've seen also Grow Native Massachusetts has been growing a list as well of nurseries. I didn't know that you guys had some too. We'll check it out.
Yeah, and Brucey, I think, does the Mass Pollinator Network have a list on their
Yes,
site?
well, Mass Pollinator Network is now part of Grow Native Massachusetts. We do have resource information on native plant nurseries.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dog's barking in the background.
I think Paul had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Dave, what got you hooked? What got you started and what got you hooked with pollinator moths?
Well, interesting. again, I've been a naturalist since really the eighth grade, so I've been on this journey for a really long time. And what kind of started, um, we used to take this trip every year. It was actually the prize for for being the top birder in the eighth grade. We went all the way to Northfield from Athol, which is 30 miles. That was a big deal for an eighth grader. But anyway, so I did that same trip for probably 35 or 40 years, and at the towards the end, the last decade or so, there was so much development and so much stuff happening with birds in general that I really got soured on birds, because instead of seeing a tree full of 20 species of warbler, and 100 birds, you'd see 20 birds of 5 species of warbler. You know what I mean? And it just kept going like that. So I really started looking at other things. And I really was, dragonflies were pretty prominent in those early days, as were butterflies. And I just kind of kept going. And I took the dragonfly course at Eagle Hill first, and really absolutely adore dragonflies. And this time of year now, it's been raining way too much, by the way. I just want you to know that, um, including today. But it kind of evolved. You know what I mean? And I was always, really looking at other scientists and what they're doing, and I've counted everything. I've counted calling amphibians, and I've done pollard counts for butterflies, and I've done bee bowl traps, and all these various different aspects. And when I was working for the state as a manager at the Quabbin Reservoir, um, I really felt, as being a land manager, to know as much about what was happening within the landscape was really important in the decision process about how we do things. And so that's really kind of just mushroomed into all these things. And now I'm always looking at new species and new groups of things to try to learn. And fireflies are kind of cool now. And so I'm just a generalist naturalist.
And the other question would be is, do you see more species, say, of any particular moths in the last 10 years? Is there any moths going in the right direction?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's a pretty distinct reduction in the overall diversity. You know what I mean? Or the abundance. I guess I'm still getting most all the species, but I'm seeing fewer individuals of all the species.
Right.
So I just think it's a matter of the amount of biomass that's being created, that is, again, the fuel for all these other things. I mean, these moths and butterflies are the engine that drives all the other organisms in the forest. This is what's converting sunlight into protein. And that really is a very important part of their natural history that I really think. But we're still okay. It's but when you look at the other side of things, most of the bird species that feed on insects are also declining. So, and I think there's a direct correlation between the two.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry, I have a question. As a layperson who loves moths and spent quite some time trying to remove one from the screened-in porch without touching it, I wouldn't die overnight. What, if anything, are things that people, even those of us who mean well, might do that are bad for moths and hurt them?
Yeah, I think basically the best thing we do is to try to destigmatize moths to other people. You know what I mean? So we kind of get some of that fear and loathing of moths out of the way. But we really got to be conscious. Like, don't leave your lights on at night. We go to, like, I have at my house, we have all motion sensor lights, for that are, I have it over here near my bird feeder, so when the fox comes by or whatever, I get to see it. But I don't keep lights on all night. And basically, when I do lighting, I do it very specifically for time periods that I'm actually out there observing. So we're not just keeping that going all the time, because it does disrupt where they were headed. Because these moths are moving around, and I should say that moths, if they have different seasonalities through the season, but they also have different flight periods during the night. And several things that I know of actually don't show up to midnight or 2 in the morning. So that's an interesting, thing, that there's both the seasonality and the time of night are very different, and we get different things. So being diverse is always good. So quite often I'll set it up so that I get up in the middle of the night and look at my moth light and then turn it off before the morning. I did that today. I was out at 4 o'clock this morning and had some great stuff. But that's unusual. I don't often do that because I have a job and stuff.
Are solar lights, and I don't mean giant ones. I'm not talking about I'm talking about small solar lights that cast a little bit of light or even really more decorative than anything else. Are those, if they are away from, for example, we never leave the lights on outside, the electric light,
Yeah.
when we're
Yeah,
not.
I don't think those low voltage lights are that much of an issue. I don't think that's going to attract stuff to them. It's these other, the big culprits are your gas stations and mall parking lots and stuff that just
Right.
have way too much light. And I know there's people in my town that just have these spotlights on all night, and that's just the wrong message.
Right, and that's really bright, but just a little solar light, sort of here and there, and they're not right near the house either. I don't really see things hanging around
Yeah, no,
particularly.
I don't think those are a big attractant. Yeah, yeah, those shouldn't be bothered. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This has been amazing.
I have
Well,
a question
yeah,
about
good.
life cycle of moths and seasonality. I didn't know that they came out year round, and certain ones like Cecropia could be born, the larva is in 1 year, but it overwinters in
Right.
right. And I was with a naturalist who a friend raised it for this naturalist, and I don't know if you knew Eric Olson at Brandeis. When he saw it in June of the following year, the husk was so um, thick that he took a little knife to open up like the outer layer to
Mhm.
help it release itself. Well, not everyone can rely on that knife. So how would it have emerged otherwise?
Well, usually most often they do get out eventually, and it may require some extra moisture or something that actually softens that shell a bit so they'll get out. But again, uh, with most insects, there's a lot of casualties along the way, and certainly that transformation from an egg to a caterpillar, from a caterpillar to a chrysalis, whatever, those are very vulnerable times for things, and things can go wrong. So um, that's part of the cycle. And with most insects, they lay enough eggs and have enough offspring that it's the numbers compensate for the loss.
Mm-hmm. And once we see them in their adult stage, is that a pretty short-lived part of their life?
It depends on the species.
Okay.
On the silk moths that don't feed as adults, they're only here for a few days to a week or so, and then they're done. But there are moths that actually would be around for 10, 11 months even as adults, and then they reproduce. Like the morning cloak butterfly is a 10-month as adult. You know what I mean? Which is kind of a long lifespan. For a Lepidoptera.
Yeah.
So there are, it really depends on the species. And I'm sure there's some that are even quicker in their life cycle.
Well, once the rosy pink came out for maple tree, what happened after that?
Yeah, well, they don't feed as adults. They're all, they're part of that group that just,
They're part of the silks. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, So yeah, no, it's just a matter of the different species doing what they're doing. And so yeah, no, it's all good.
Fascinating. Well, this has been delightful, and the images are just, I'm gonna sleep on this and think about these beautiful these beautiful feathers and these cloaks that they seem to wear. But I want to thank you so much for enlightening all of us and sharing these lovely pictures. It's been
Well,
a great talk. Um,
well,
so
I appreciate it. I just hope everybody, keeps up the message, so, we want to, plant native, do the best we can with what we've got. And even your little acre or, you know, even your deck with a few native plants on your deck can be a help to something. So, I had a good friend that lived right in the downtown part of Orange on the third floor of her apartment. It had over 125 species right there on the third floor deck, just with some plants and some trees nearby. So, we can all do our part.
great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for attending tonight. Nice turnout, really important. So, have a good
Yep.
evening, and see you at
Yep.
the mothball, hopefully in
Alrighty.
July.
See
Okay,
you,
Thank
Calvin.
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Bye, everyone.
you. Thank
Bye now.
you.